As a kid, I used to go to Japan once every year or two, for around a month at a time. I'd love it there. I'd stay with family and do nothing but play the whole time. So many happy memories. Except for one. School. Since my first time at daycare, I never enjoyed being in any form of prison. I mean, school. So when my mum sentenced me to 2 weeks at elementary school in Japan, I was gutted. First day there, nerve-wracking. One of my older sisters was attending the school with me, but she was in another class, and of course my usual gang of friends wouldn't be there to make things bearable, and how was I going to make any? Unlike my sister, my Japanese wasn't good at all. The first thing I had to do there was introduce myself to the whole class. All eyes on me. No one said a word to me during my first lesson. Then, finally, the bell rang. Everyone swarmed around me. I'd never had so much attention thrown at me in my life. Even kids from other classes would come to see me. This new half-kid in town. I was probably the first foreigner many of them had ever met. But sadly, I could barely communicate with them. They had all sorts of questions, but half the time I could only reply with, "Imi wakaranai, shiranai." Inevitably, a few days in, they lost interest. A week in, and I started dreading going in. For once, Japan felt so foreign to me. The differences started to stick out to me. Stuff like swapping into school-only shoes upon entering the site. How the school curriculum was way ahead of what we had back home, leaving me behind and making me feel a bit dumb. How lunch would be brought to the classrooms by fellow pupils, and I often didn't like what was being served because it was too healthy. So I was seen as the fussy English boy. At the end of each day, it would be the students doing the cleaning. Kids would never be picked up by parents, they'd walk all the way home. None of these were bad differences, they were just, well, they took some getting used to. Meanwhile, my sister was having the time of her life in her class. The only thing that kept me happy in mine were these two guys, who always tried to include me during school and even after, completely ignoring any sort of language barrier. God, I wish I knew their names. I'd love to have a proper conversation with them now that my Japanese is better. Before heading back to England as a way of saying thank you and goodbye to my classmates, I decided to give Christmas cards to everyone. It was the usual thing to do each year back home, but Christmas isn't really celebrated in Japan, except for KFC. Still, everyone seemed to like it, and I even wrote an extra note for this girl I kinda liked. I didn't expect anything to come of it, since I'd be leaving the country in a few days, but when I gave it to her, she read it, blushed, and disappeared. I'm still waiting for that enthusiastic yes. So I left school in Japan with mostly a bad taste in my mouth and never went back. It didn't spark any interest in learning Japanese, as my mum likely hoped. In fact, it did the opposite. The holidays to Japan stopped too. 8 years quickly got behind me without ever visiting, mostly because I couldn't afford the air ticket. I gave up learning Japanese at one point, forgetting most of it. At school here, the experience of being Asian was all a bit rubbish, to be honest. I go into more detail about why in this video here. It's also one of my better videos. Anyway, one day, during lunch break at miserable old sixth form, this guy sitting next to me was reading through pages of Japanese. So I struck up conversation with him. Turns out he was half Japanese as well. He let me attempt to read what he was studying, but all I learned was how badly I had neglected my Japanese. The struggle took me back to my days at Japanese school, both here and in Japan. But this time, funnily, it rekindled my interest in the language. So thanks to this guy, Chris, I started learning the language again. I finally started speaking to my mum in Japanese, and along the way developed a huge interest in the culture and history. I guess at the time I felt rejected by Britain, so I turned to my other half. I started wondering if maybe the experience of being half might be better in Japan. This was confirmed when I went there earlier this March. I felt immediately at home. 8 years had passed since I last came, but I only felt a stronger connection. Here in the UK, I've lived my whole life feeling like the invisible man. Whereas in Japan, I think it's finally my turn to shine. Well now, what I want to know from you, have you ever felt that way? Do you have a second home? Would you ever make it your main home? So if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it in the future, leave a like and hit subscribe, and make sure to leave a comment down below. I'd really appreciate the support. Anyway, until next time, I should go. Cheerio, mata ne!